Today on CityCast Philly, it's the Friday News Roundup. We're talking about ballot deadlines, asbestos in schools, and a happy hour for medical workers. It's Friday, March 10th, 2023. I'm Trinae Nuri, and here's what Philly's talking about. I'm joined by Vanessa Maria Graber, News Voices Director at Free Press and President of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, Philadelphia chapter. Hey, Vanessa.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. And Lawrence McGlynn, co-host and producer of the Philadelphia Hall Monitor. Hey, Lawrence.
Hi, it's so nice to be with you and my friend Vanessa, so it's great to be here.
Yes. Before we get started in all these news topics of the week, and it's been a week, I've got to ask y'all, because this week was International Women's Day, and this month is celebrating all women history. So I got to ask, who is your favorite Pennsylvanian or Philadelphian woman in history? Don't all go off. Would it be okay if I started?
Yeah.
Okay. My favorite Philadelphian, Caroline LeCount, because she did some amazing work in the 1800s with integrating the streetcars in Philadelphia. We actually featured her story on the podcast last month. They're thinking of renaming Taney Street LeCount Street. And so if you're listening to the show, you can click that link in our show notes and check that episode out. But yeah, Caroline LeCount, one of my favorite Philadelphians.
One of my favorite people that I actually met while working at PhillyCam was Trudy Haynes. And if you don't know Trudy Haynes, she is iconic woman in journalism, very inspiring. And she became the nation's first African-American TV weather reporter. And even though she's not from Philadelphia, she went on to work at KYW, CBS, and spent the rest of her life here. She recently passed, but up until her death last year, she was still making media, hosting TV shows, and doing philanthropic work. And yeah, she is definitely an inspiration.
I remember seeing her at PhillyCam, and I was just in awe. I loved her spirit and her passion for news. Larry, do you have any favorite Pennsylvanian or Philadelphia women?
So in the time between you asked that question and Vanessa spoke, I had to Google really quick to make sure the people I was thinking of were from Philadelphia, and I couldn't verify it. So what I'm going to do is go with the safe one here and say Betsy Ross.
Okay.
And when we talk about symbolism in the United States of America, we have to talk about the flag and all the good things that means and all the negative things that means and how we interpret what that flag means for us in this country and how we use it as a protest tool, how we use it as a celebratory tool, and all the things that come into that. So I'm going to go with Betsy Ross.
Got it. Awesome. Well, thanks, y'all. I just wanted to shake things up a little bit this morning.
And you certainly did.
I knew it. I was like, I'm going to get them on this one. Okay. So going back to our conversations. So Vanessa, what top stories caught your eye this week?
For me, it was the Temple Student Graduate Association strike. I actually just recently learned that they were going on strike, and it turns out they actually voted in November of last year. Overwhelmingly, 99% voted yes to striking, and they're in the 6th week of their strike. And it's the first time in the Temple Student Graduate Association's 20-year history that they are striking. And recently, the Inquirer reported this week that there's some progress being made after many weeks of negotiation. And so when I looked into it, I found out that they're striking for a living wage. Mm-hmm. Most notable to me was that the average graduate employee pay at Temple is $19,500 a year. And when I was a graduate student working at the University of North Carolina, when I worked on my PhD program, That is what I was paid back in 2004. So if you can
Wow.
imagine,
Okay.
yeah, right, that I was paid around $19,000 back then. And that's what Temple graduate students are making now. Many graduate students are teaching assistants, or they're actually teaching college courses. They're researching,
Hmm.
they're doing a number of jobs. They're looking for a base wage pay of $32,800, which still seems pretty low.
Hmm.
They're also asking for health care for dependents and families.
Hmm.
It's really expensive, apparently, to add people onto their health care plan. And so this has been really difficult for students who have spouses and children. And they're also looking for longer parental and bereavement leave. Temple administration is reporting the progress, and they've recently restored their health subsidies. This week, they were taken away from the students last
Hmm.
month, as well as their tuition benefits. They were also taken away since they're on strike. And so they are expected to pay their tuition this week, or they're not going to be able to register for classes and they're going to face a late fee.
Yeah, and I also read in WHYY news that there may be some union efforts for Penn students as well, the medical students who are seeking residencies. They also have similar demands for better pay and better childcare options as well.
Yeah,
Um,
recently the University of California state system had a really big strike that made national news. So I'm wondering, if these strikes happening in other places are starting to create a domino effect, and here in Philadelphia, where you see Temple and now Penn students beginning to organize.
Well, yeah, and this is to me fundamentally important for a lot of reasons. When we talk about labor rights, we're talking about the rights of like everybody. And the troubling thing about this is I have a reverence for Temple University. I'm a graduate. The school was very good to me, treated me very well.
same, same.
And when you see what's happening now with the way the institution has treated these students, and I would not even necessarily say they're completely students. They're also employees of the institution. They're doing a lot of work there. They teach classes. They work with students. They do all kinds of things. The way the institution's handled this, I think, has been appalling. When you start taking away people's benefits because they're trying to negotiate a better deal. And by the way, if we were serious about this, the negotiations maybe would have already taken place. You wouldn't gotten to the place where the students feel like they have to strike. And,
Hmm.
hopefully it gets resolved very soon so people can get back on track with their lives and their studies.
So, when it gets to some more stories, Larry, you covered the recent budget proposal down in City Hall. We talked about that on our show on Monday, but I'm curious, how has council been reacting to Mayor Kenny's budget proposal?
I think overall, not just from council, but from observers, it's been received pretty favorably. I
Hmm.
think, when we talk about, added money to anti-gun violence programs, more money for parks, trying to expand library service, those kinds of things. People walked away thinking, okay, this is good. There's some good things in here. Now, where we're really going to find out is when the budget hearings begin at the end of the month. March 28th, the budget hearings are set to begin. They're going to go all through May.
Hmm.
And, usually beyond that, actually, they could go to June, depending on who they want to come back and see. But every department comes before city council to justify their budget and answer questions about it. And, in that time, we might see some things move around. But for right now, where we are at the moment, I think everybody feels like this is a solid budget. And part of that, too, is because there's extra money this year. There's American
Okay.
Recovery Plan funds
Hmm.
that haven't been spent down yet. And the city brought in more in tax revenue than they expected. So there is a budget surplus this year. And if you're going to use it, now's the time, right?
Hmm.
We're facing severe problems. So let's use some of that money to, start to help in those areas.
And Vanessa, you brought this story, which, is also, the backdrop story that's happening down in City Hall. This week was the deadline for candidates to file paperwork so that they could get on the ballot in May. This story was surprising. I didn't realize how many people were wanting to get these seats. And we're talking, obviously, the mayor, city council, the sheriff's office, city controller. Vanessa, is this like a special year? Like, why do so many people want these jobs this year?
Well, for many reasons, right? So, well, just to give folks a rundown, over 90 candidates filed paperwork this week on Tuesday to drop off their petition so they could get on the ballot. And the next coming weeks, they will, staff at the Board of Elections will be looking through those petitions and verifying the information, and then we'll see who actually makes the ballot. So right now that number 90 could go down a bunch. We'll have to see how everybody makes the ballot.
Okay.
You're not officially a candidate until you're on the ballot. So I want to make that clear to our listeners. There's a lot of people campaigning as candidates, but if you don't make the ballot, you're not actually a viable candidate.
Okay, that's good to know. Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and that's why this is one of the underreported stories, because I don't think people realized how many folks were running. So for mayor's race, 13 candidates filed paperwork, 12 Democrats and 1 Republican. That's David O. I guess nobody is going to be running against him in the primary. And then over 60 people are vying for city council seats. There's other positions available. As we know, city controller, the sheriff, the register of wills. Those are also positions that people have to run for in the city of Philadelphia. And I think that people are especially interested this year for many reasons, right? There's obviously a really big concern about public safety, right? That seems to be the theme of the race. Mm-hmm. I have been covering some of the candidate forums for mayor, and that is the driving conversation, is what everyone is going to do about crime, about the number of homicides, about the selling of drugs and the opioid crisis. And I think there's a lot of people who are dissatisfied with what the current administration and city council is doing. And so that's a reason why a lot of candidates have said they've jumped in the race. There's also a lot of vacancies, right? So there are, I believe, 8 seats available for people to run in city council this year. And of course, we have 5 at-large seats. And so 3 of them might be taken by the incumbents, Isaiah Thomas, Catherine Gilmore Richardson, and Jimmy Harity. They might not, but that still leaves 2 new vacancies. So that is anyone's game. And so I think the at-large race is definitely going to be really interesting to watch. That's where we see the most candidates. But like I said, not official until you get past this process right here.
On the ballot, yes.
So we'll be checking back in a couple of weeks to see who actually made the ballot. But apparently, this is not really that historic. At times, over 100 people have ran for city council.
Okay.
And so right now, this doesn't necessarily compare to that. But I do think in recent years, it has been a much higher number of people running for council than we have seen recently.
Another story that caught my eye this week was the Building 21 relocation, right? And the school district officials initially said that inspectors found asbestos in the auditorium and hallways there during a recent inspection, and they had to relocate students to Strawberry Mansion High School because at the time they only had a certain amount of virtual school days that they could do. But since then, the state did grant them more days that the students could be virtual. But earlier this week, parents were just really upset that they had to make this transition to a new school building, right? They had to come up with different, commutes and worry about transportation and safety and, a whole plethora of issues, really. And the district had known about the asbestos at the building for 2 years.
Well, there's a lot. I feel like we have one of these stories every couple of weeks now where something like this is happening with the school district. And it's been going on for a long time. And one of the main culprits for this, getting back to budgeting a little bit, is what happens at the state level. Philadelphia doesn't get its fair share of funding for anything. Philadelphia, for every dollar we send out, we maybe get 75 cents back from the state in terms of funding, probably a lot less than that, depending on how you look at it. But one of the key issues here, the state passed a fair funding formula that was going to boost revenue for all school districts, especially ours. But they put a caveat in it that said that only applies to new funding. So only about 12% of education funding goes through this formula, which means it's still completely inequitable. To put it another way, when we talk about the infrastructure issues that are plaguing the school district, I think the school district's yearly budget is about $3.5 billion, somewhere in that neighborhood. It would take $4 billion to fix all the issues in the schools, all the infrastructure
And that's
issues.
including the asbestos.
Yes.
Also
Air
adding
conditioning.
air conditioners.
Yep.
Lead paint.
Lead paint, water.
Oh, right. The water issues. Right. Mm-hmm.
Water issues.
Mm-hmm.
And, some of these schools, you can't really put air conditioning on the roof because they're old buildings. Mm-hmm. You might have to build a new building. So when we're talking about asbestos in one school, this is decades of, and I don't even want to call it neglect. It's willful neglect on the part of the state that has caused these problems. And when you look at it,
but it's also disproportionate in neighborhoods and districts
yes,
where the poverty level is higher.
That's right.
And so it's to say that they're just doing this, willfully to Philadelphia is not actually true. It's to Black and brown communities and the schools where there is a much lower average, salary and income. And so that's what makes it especially egregious for me, because if this were happening in Roxborough or in Somerton or in, a wealthier neighborhood, I don't think that those conditions would continue as long as this has in this particular school.
What also stood out to me about this particular story, that along with, the infrastructure concerns, it also, parents voice concerns about safety and logistics. Having to send your child to a new school every morning, you have to fight traffic. You have to get to work, right? Or school. You may have other children, and now you have to send them into a new neighborhood that they may not be familiar with. The district did say that they would provide private entrances for students and buses to shuttle them, and even more security. As a mom with 2 kids, that also made me upset, because I'm like, these parents are scared. They had to make these dramatic changes to their lives within days. And so, Vanessa, you said you went to some of these mayoral forums in the past weeks. Is anyone talking about that?
They're not. I mean, I think Helen Gim, talks about it in a broader sense in terms of, fixing crumbling public school infrastructure. And I think that is something that is talked about very broadly, not just limited to public schools, right? Like our crumbling infrastructure nationwide. There's highways, there's bridges, there's roads, and so it's part of a larger problem. I mean, I have heard other candidates like Sherelle Parker and also Helen Gim talk about making school buildings greener and working with the unions to do that. But anything else that I've heard around schools has been about trying to create job placement programs. And really, like, I wrote about this recently, in terms of the conversation around gun violence, right? And there's 2 things I want to highlight. And there was a Penn and a Columbia study that came out that said beautifying and repairing people's homes, like investing into those neighborhoods, actually, was correlated to a reduction in crime.
Yep.
And so I would think that something similar is true with schools, right? Like fixing up our schools, investing in them, making them state of the art technology and learning centers could potentially, right, like reduce violence within the schools, because violence is not always in people's neighborhoods or out on the streets with these teens. We're seeing a lot of violence in the schools within the school day. Um, in Philadelphia. And so something is happening there. Imagine if you go to school, it's falling apart, right? And the teachers are not paid well, they're tired, they're overworked. There's all types of policing and security. I mean, that creates a culture and a climate that I don't think is conducive to learning. And so when I see the massive amounts of construction happening in Fishtown and now East Kensington and North Philadelphia, right? It's creeping right up, and also in neighborhoods like Point Breeze and other parts of South Philly and University City. They're building things instantly, right? Like literally, like a month will pass by and
That's a
I will
good
see a new
point.
building.
That's a good
And so,
point.
I wonder, why aren't we building community centers and
Mm.
schools and other community resources at the same rate? We can do it, right? Like,
That's a really good point. I never even connected that. That's really good.
Well, and the other part of that too is, when we look at this budget surplus we have now, that's one of the questions I'm going to have as we go through the process is, well, how much of this are you going to use now
Mm.
as investments? And one of the things that our show had been talking about for a while is when interest rates were really, really low during the pandemic, why didn't the city just say, okay, we're going to borrow like $1 billion right now because the rates are so low. Let's invest that in something. And that didn't happen.
Interesting.
Nobody did that though, to be honest.
Hmm.
But those are the questions that you kind of wonder. Well, what about more investment here in Philadelphia? What more can we do? And when you have a $6 billion operating budget, there's a lot of power in that maybe is untapped.
And since recording this, more information actually has come out about asbestos in Philly schools. Mastery's Simon Gratz High School and Gratz Prep Middle School in North Philly have closed after damaged asbestos was found during a regular inspection this week on Wednesday. We will keep following this story, but in the meantime, we'll have a link to this ongoing story in our show notes. All right, before we head out for the weekend, we got to end on some good news. Vanessa, you found a story about how a community in the suburbs really supported a local pizzeria. Can you tell us about that?
so yeah, there is a pizzeria in Hatboro, which is right outside the city. But I chose this story because, it was very relatable, and I witnessed similar things in my life. And so the name of the pizzeria is called Amy's Pizzeria. It's owned by Latino immigrants Omar Quinones and his wife, Kaylin Flores. And they had an incident last week. You might have seen it. It blew up on TikTok and other social media platforms. And it was a woman spouting racist remarks at Quinones because she was upset that their television at the pizzeria was paying Spanish language programming. And as a Puerto Rican woman, grew up in a Latino household where, Telemundo Univision was on all the time.
Right.
This for me hit home, and I couldn't understand why somebody would be mad at that. But the feel good part of the story is that tons and tons of people from all over the world started communicating with the owners and offering support and letting them know that they do appreciate them and that it is totally okay to embrace your culture and your language, and that they are very much important members of the community. And so since then, they've been flooded with tons and tons of orders. On the first day after the incident, they received 250 orders, and it just continued to start. They received so many orders that they had to actually close for a day
Oh, wow.
to restock. And then I should notice saying, thank you so much, for your support. We actually only have two people working in the kitchen, so we can't keep up. But they also said that people had been making donations and that people were driving an hour or even 2 hours just to come buy a slice of pizza and say hello. And so, that restores my faith in humanity. I have witnessed people being upset because folks were speaking in Spanish. I had witnessed that many times as a child. And, in 2023, people are still upset. I don't understand it, right? We are a multicultural society. This is a sanctuary city here in Philadelphia. We speak many languages. There's many different cultures here that should be celebrated. And I'm glad to see that the majority of people still believe in that and came out in droves to offer this couple support. Because again, we can't let one person with a negative or racist attitude make us think that everybody is like that. And so that made me really happy. And yeah.
Larry, what about you?
The city of Philadelphia is going to commit $62 million for fare-free transit for 25,000 Philadelphians living below the poverty line. That's a program that's, I think, going to start next year, and I think that's a great first step when we talk about equity and alleviating poverty.
And that also includes city workers, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So it's one of the things that they're using to try to attract people to, because the city has about an 18% vacancy rate for jobs right now. And that's one of the things that they think might be able to entice people to come work for the city. But I think for people below the poverty level, SEPT is their lifeline to get the work, get the appointments. That's a great thing to do.
That's good. One story that stood out to me was a local restaurant called Co-op Restaurant and Bar. They are offering a happy hour, and this happy hour is really geared to medical workers who have to work that late night shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. They can never, make it to a happy hour. So they have something called Sips and Scrubs, which is a happy hour Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 9 a.m., where they're offering $5 mimosas, Bloody Marys, and 10% discount on food if you show your medical ID. And I think that's just really great.
Hey, we're still not out of the clear with, COVID and flu. We're still wintertime. And our medical community is still working really, really hard, especially in the emergency rooms.
Right.
And I think that's great. More restaurants and businesses should show them that kind of love.
Yeah. And Co-op Restaurant and Bar is located on South 33rd Street. So go check that out. All right. Vanessa Maria Graber, News Voices Director at Free Press and President of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists Philadelphia chapter. Thank you so much for joining me on CityCast Philly.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And Lawrence McGlynn, co-host and producer of the Philadelphia Hall Monitor. Thank you too for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It's time for the tip of the day, where we share a life hack for living in Philly. On today's episode, we talked a lot about some of the nuances when it comes to getting your name on a ballot. So if you want to learn more about how elections work in Pennsylvania, read Title 25, that's the election code, by going to legis.state.pa.us. We'll have a link in our show notes. If you have a tip of the day, we'd love to hear from you too. Call or text us at 215-259-8170. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. Our lead producer is Mallory Folk. Our producer is Abby Fritz. Our Hey Philly newsletter editor is Brittany Valentine. And our host is me, Trenae Nuri. Music is by Philly's own Interminable, with additional music from All the Kimonos and James Weldon. If you enjoy the show, really all this week of episodes, tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter, Hey Philly. We'll be back Monday morning with more news from around the city. Have a great weekend and be safe. Bye. Rate this show. Damn it, the train.